All right, well, welcome everyone. We've got a panel here that is titled "Addressing Water Scarcity," and boy, is that a timely topic. My name is Jeff Vanden Heuvel, and I'm the Director of Regulatory and Economic Affairs for Milk Producers Council, which is a dairy farmer trade association here in California. And one of my responsibilities is to kind of be the dairy industry's eyes and ears and advocate on water supply issues, and particularly with the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So I've been doing that for almost 4 years now, since I retired from active dairy farming down in Chino. And you can't really pick up a newspaper or watch the news today without seeing a story about the drought. We're in a very significant drought, dry period. Really 2019 was the last year where we had in California what you might say above normal or normal water precipitation in the winter. 2020 was pretty dry. 2021 was very dry, and 2021-22, the water year we're in right now, we had some hope in December with some storms late in the year of 2021, and then a dry period from January really through the middle of March, where almost no water at all fell in precipitation or snow in California. And we're facing a very, very serious situation. And so for a dairy sustainability summit, where we knew that water availability was a long-term concern, here we are facing just incredibly dry conditions. And so we're wondering, what are we going to do? So we have a very unique panel here of a couple of really qualified people to help us think about this issue. First, we have Dr. Michael McCullough from Cal Poly San Luis, and he is a professor of agribusiness there at Cal Poly. His research and teaching interests deal with California production agriculture, and he's done some very important work already, and there's more work to come from Michael, and so we'll hear about Michael in a moment. And then we also have Dave DeGrowt, and Dave is a dairy kid who went into engineering and has become one of the premier engineers. Started the Four Creeks engineering firm back in 2008, and has been responsible for an enormous amount of work in terms of developing dairies and dairy digester programs and water programs. But he also has been responsible and is the civil engineer responsible for a substantial amount of the water resources in the Tule subbasin, being the water master of the Tule River and the chief engineer for a number of the GSAs located in the Tule subbasin. So we've got two really qualified folks here to help us with this. And so I want to turn first to Dr. McCullough and ask you, you've been studying the impacts of water scarcity and Sigma on the San Joaquin Valley farming and ranching community for some time. How bad is it, and how much worse is it going to get?
Sure. Yeah. I think what we can do, just really quick, if we want to go through these slides, we had done a good study on the Tule subbasin and finished it up this last year. That was funded through the Strategic Growth Council with project partners at ERA Economics and UC Merced, where we're looking specifically, where are things at? Like intro talked about, things are pretty bad right now. And at the time when we were looking at things, Sigma implementation wasn't quite in yet. So we had gone through and looked specifically in the subbasin there at all agricultural production and estimated, what the different crops were, and specifically looking at just production, no cattle or dairy, we had about estimated 55,000 acres of silage, of feed, with between 100 and 200 employees. Just some background on the modeling really quick, and then we can move into think about, okay, where things are going. How will we look at, what these impacts might be in the future, and how we're going to move forward with this is using some unique modeling, hydroeconomic modeling tools. We're able to look at the link between these policies, agricultural production, and how that impacts what production is going to be, what land island might be, how wide areas might impact some of this stuff. So let's get the clicker here. So in the subbasin, right, with projects and management actions, the GSPs estimate about 40,000 acre feet a year new inflows, and total reduction in groundwater pumping of 226,000 acre feet a year. All of that being said, what are the impacts? What were the impacts that we estimated on production from this first initial study looking at things? By 2040, particularly in silage, going from 55,000 acres down to 33,000 acres. We looked as well how some different strategies might be to mitigate some of these changes, and we can see that in this particular case, and at the time, with the price of silage what it was, when you implement trading, groundwater trading, silage tends to be a little bit of a, I wouldn't say loser, but we see a little bit more land coming out of silage and going over towards citrus and some of their other higher value crops. So from 55,000 down to 32,000 acres. And then this study in particular had looked at how those impacts can be brought over to the local communities, and in particular the direct labor that's employed. And for silage, not for the dairies, but just for silage, we see a reduction of about 100 jobs. Now, all of that being said, that our initial work looking at what these impacts might be on agricultural production and the links between those and the communities, we didn't get into what the specific impacts on dairies would be. And that's where we're moving towards next, right? And so that's where we want to go, and looking at, okay, how do we expand this out? How do we look at how the change in feed prices are going to affect dairies, and how that's going to affect the cattle industry and other downstream processors? And so that's what we're just getting started on and thinking about. So I think we can stop our slides just as a review on where we're at. Thank you. And I can come back to your question. How bad is it, and how much worse is it going to get? Right, sigma is a component of water scarcity. I think a big part of what sigma can be is a way to provide certainty in what water allocations are going to be in the future, right? It's really difficult to run a business when you have uncertainty, and when one of your main inputs is how much you're going to have year-to-year basis changes as much as it has over the last few years. It's makes it even more difficult, a lot more risky. And so I think one of the good things we can look to for sigma in the future, in the long run, is hopefully having that idea of, yeah, I know how much water we're going to have, and then being able to adjust to that. Yeah, just as an initial thought there. I think we can keep going, but yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll get a little bit more in, but I think that's a really good spot to bring David DeGrowt in to this conversation. You've been intricately involved in Sigma Sustainable Groundwater Management Act implementation in the southern part of the valley. And what impacts of that what do you think the impacts of that implementation are going to be on the dairy sector?
Yeah, so we've been talking about Sigma for quite a few years, and I think this is really the first year where it's really starting to move into an implementation phase that people are really starting to see direct impacts. As what was discussed earlier and throughout the summit is it takes water to operate a dairy. It takes a lot of water to operate a dairy. The good thing about dairies is they recycle a lot of that water over the years to become very efficient about using that water as efficiently as they can. But at the end of the day, it's still a numbers game. You need a certain amount of water to operate your facility. And so the biggest impact is going to be, is maybe not so much on the dairy facility side, but it's going to be on the feed side where without adequate water, or with the certainty of the water that you need to grow your crops, where is your feed going to come from? The implementation of Sigma is going to impact local forages, local hay, silages and wheats, and where dairies are going to be able to grow adequate feed to sustain their cow health and nutritional health to produce the milk is going to be it's going to be impacted by the implementation of Sigma. And what goes hand in hand with that, and I know there's other sessions today they're going to talk about water quality and nutrient balancing, but there's a water quality aspect to it of not only do you need water to grow the forages that your dairy needs to feed its cows, but you also need to be able to get rid of the nutrients that your dairy produces. And the way that is the most efficient way to do that is to use your crops to utilize those nutrients that are being produced to grow the feed. But if you can't mix those nutrients with adequate water and grow enough forages, then you're going to have a nutrient reduction problem that's going to need to be addressed. And I know there's other opportunities in that arena, but these are the things that as a dairy farmer in the Central Valley with the implementation of Sigma, you really need to be focused on, how do I manage my feed supply with my forages, and in concert with that, my nutrients.
So Dave, you just recently, Four Creeks your firm came out with a white paper on actual dairy facility water consumption. Could you walk us through that? I think that idea is probably not widely known, and you've really, kind of honed in this paper, which, by the way, is available maybe other places, but it's available on the Milk Producers Council website. We've got a link there for this paper. But Dave, could you tell us about what you've laid out there?
Yeah, what our focus was on the white paper was the dairy production facility. There was a lot of common misconceptions about how much water a dairy uses. And so the first thing that we addressed is that a dairy production facility typically uses a lot of water. There's a lot of water that's being used, starting in the milk barn to cool the milk, to flush, the lanes where the cows eat, keep the dairy clean. Water is used to cool the cows through soaker systems during the summer months. And so the misconception is well, dairies use a lot of water. What a lot of non-dairy folks don't realize is that a lot of that water gets recycled, gets mixed with the manure that gets produced and excreted from the cows, and gets reapplied to the farmland. Therefore, it's less water that's being pumped and consumed on the farmland side. So when you're doing a net balance for the dairy facility with the farmland, you got to be very careful you don't count twice for the water that's being used throughout the facility, especially when we're looking at ET models with satellite consumption models.
Yeah, Dave, I hate to interrupt you. Could you just briefly explain ET satellite models for measuring water consumption?
Yeah, so there's several models out there. Some are through college, the collegiate arena, and then also in private practice. In the South Valley, typically using with a company called Land IQ. There's also OpenET, which has been provided by the government. Basically, what they use, they take images of the Earth, and in those images of the Earth, there's a heat index to those images and the wavelengths of light. And from that, there's algorithms that they've applied with a lot of ground truthing, using weather stations and precipitation stations to determine how much water is consumed by a crop. So it really takes out the, the error on trying to figure out how much water is pumped versus return flow that goes back to the groundwater. It really just looks at what was consumed on the surface, and can be done on all different crop types. The issue is that doesn't really work well on a dairy facility. There is evaporation, maybe a little bit of transpiration from some landscaping in front of the milk barn, or maybe some employee houses or houses on the site. But the majority of water that is used on a dairy facility gets recycled and comes out the back end. The other is there's a lot of import. A dairy imports a lot of feed, imports that has a lot of water in the feed, in the stuff that's being imported. A very obvious example is a lot of dairies feed whey. And you look at that, a whey truck comes in 1 or 2 times a day. Yeah, milk truck leaves, but whey trucks are coming in. All your silage, your hay, your wet distillers, your corn gluten, everything that gets used on a dairy to feed also has water in it. And when you start looking at the imports versus the exports, things balance out. And that's really what our white paper does, is really try to evaluate how much water is actually consumed and exported from a dairy facility that is exported and removed from the subbasin. And on our estimates, which could vary dairy to dairy, every dairy is unique. But our estimates in the white paper is we've concluded that a good starting point for a GSA would be about 6 inches of water within the dairy production facility.
So that would be 6 inches of water consumption.
Correct.
In a year.
Correct.
Half an acre foot.
Per acre. Yep.
Per acre. Okay. So your white paper went into this description of how water both came on the dairy, both in terms of feed and in groundwater pumped, and then how it exits the through the milk and through the cattle actually that go to beef. They're exporting a certain amount of water in their bodies, and you really track that all the way through. So it's a very valuable white paper, and anyone that's interested in that can probably contact Four Creeks. But also, if you want to find it online, we did post it at milkproducerscouncil.org, and there's a tab on the front, and there's also a calculator that Four Creeks produced where you can adjust the number of cows and the number of acres associated with a footprint, and come up with kind of tailor it for your facility. So this is kind of what we're looking at on the dairy. So Dr. McCullough, where I was really intrigued and actually got introduced to you for the first time was when I saw a presentation that you gave of this study, this economic study that you had done, which used the Tule subbasin kind of as a test case, because you had a lot of data there. And of course, we have a large dairy population in the Tule subbasin, and I noticed that your study hadn't really delved into the impacts on the dairy industry. But now that we have more and more groundwater sustainability agencies throughout the valley that have dairies in them that are beginning to adopt these allocations, basically water budgets for farmers, including dairy. One of the things that the not just the dairymen, but the dairy industry is very concerned about and interested in trying to, wants to, get some kind of indication is what kind of impact over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years will the implementation of these groundwater restrictions have on the dairy industry? Are we going? We really haven't grown cow numbers here for, probably more than a decade. And yet our milk production remains strong because of efficiencies and genetic improvements in our cattle. But is it reasonable to expect that that's going to continue, that we'll be able to hold our own, or is there something out there that you see, Michael, that may move the industry in a different direction?
Right. Yeah, it's a tough thing. I think one of the things that we always have to keep in mind is that, water scarcity, sigma, none of this stuff happens in a bubble, right? It interacts with everything else that's going on. There's a lot of regulatory pressure in California, it's the state that we live in, and we've seen growth in the dairy herds in other states. I grew up in Idaho, right next to a bunch of dairy farms, and ran with a lot of those folks, and it was always the potato state, and that milk's their number one crop now, right? It's their number one ag commodity now, and so yeah, we're definitely seeing some of that, some of the movement out. Increased regulation, increased feed prices, water scarcity, it all makes things a little bit more difficult to be competitive, and I think, yeah. So it's tough, and it doesn't look like it's getting any easier, right? And I think the one thing that we can come back to and hopefully get out of phased implementation of Sigma is trying to understand how the industry can adjust and look towards long run sustainability, right? And I want to go back to the fact that if we've got a better idea about what our water availability is in the long run, we can plan better for the future. That's one of the big things that I think that we can focus on and hopefully get some good out of it, right? But yeah, it's a tough thing. It's a hard thing to swallow, but it's a tough thing to say that, yeah, things are looking great, because it's tough, and especially in the drought that we're in right now. That's a hard thing to say.
Dave, you've been very involved in designing and building and assisting the dairy industry with a digester program. And have you given some thought to the interaction between that very, very substantial and important initiative of the dairy industry to utilize digesters and what the restriction of water scarcity might do to that?
Yeah, it's obviously a big concern, but the nice part about the dairy the digesters that have been able to be constructed and operating on California dairies is it is providing another stage of manure management to the facility, in addition to all the other benefits of greenhouse gases and additional revenue sources for the dairy farmers. It also does add wastewater management, which if you're going to be looking at doing nutrient management, nutrient treatment on your facility, dairy digester provides a lot more uniform flow consistency that helps allow you to better manage the wastewater effluent coming out the back end of your facility. So and all these things with Sigma, what is really requiring is that each farmer, each dairy farmer needs to be a little bit more sophisticated and efficient in how they manage both their water inputs and their water outputs and their effluent and their nutrients. And a dairy digester definitely helps a dairy move in that direction.
Yeah. So, Dr. McCullough, the tasks that actually the dairy industry and the cattle council are the sponsoring entities, that Dairy Cares and the cattle council are sponsoring entities for this study that you introduced to us a little bit in your slide presentation. And the goal of that is at least from our perspective in asking you to do this, is to see whether you can. It'll be wrong, right? Because there's no way you can get this precise, but the industry is really interested in trying to think about what are the long-term implications of water scarcity and the trade-offs. And it's very interesting just on the ground right now. The dairy farmers live in the now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a really nice looking winter forage crop that's getting ready to get cut. And we're talking very substantial increase in the price of, that'll be earned by that silage. If guys can get water, I suspect there's going to be a lot of corn that gets planted because, they're talking, very substantial prices for corn silage in the field by 50% maybe increase in price from a year ago. We've got hay being delivered at well over $400 a ton, which may not mean anything to a non-dairy person, but you're looking at every truckload running down the street at $400 a ton. That's worth over $10,000, and our dairies go through a lot of truckloads of those. And I think we've always looked at the Colorado River region as a place where we could go for backstop on forage. And what we're witnessing, which is really quite remarkable when you think about it, when you look at the storage, the water storage that's on the Colorado River system, you got those two massive lakes. You got Lake Mead, by the Hoover Dam created Lake Mead, and the Glen Canyon Dam created Lake Powell. And those two lakes together are 50 million acre feet of storage. And they were full. They were full in 1999. Only 23 years ago, they were full. And there's down to about 15 million acre feet in storage now in those two lakes combined. That's a reduction of about 35 million acre feet that we've taken more out of that system than has been replaced in that system over the last 22 years. And now there are shortage provisions that are being implemented there in Arizona. And what happened to the price of hay? It went up by 35% within a couple of months. So I guess I throw these things out there. You're an economist. How do you account for, the market?
Well, I mean, hopefully in our modeling efforts, that's one of the things we want to do, right? Is see what are the relative prices between all these different crops, and how, I think in general, farmers are very resilient and are going to go do the thing that's best for them at the time. Yeah, it's it is remarkable seeing the pictures of the other reservoirs and how far down they are, and it's got direct implications, right? Yeah, higher prices for water. Those costs for water are going to keep going up as we see implementation. That leads to higher prices for feed across the board, and it's that those pressures are there, right? It's simple supply and demand. Demand's not dropping. Supply is. Prices are going to go up. Quantities are going to go down. Yeah.
What's interesting, and right now, is that price of milk has also gone up, right? So the price of milk is at unprecedented high levels. Question is it going to be enough, and how long is it going to last? So it's an industry that's full of all kinds of things that the dairy farmers don't have a lot of control over, and they got to live day to day. So, all right. Well, what are some of the? Have you got any ideas on some potential solutions or opportunities? Dr. McCullough first, and then Dave. You're hands-on in a lot of dairies. What kind of things can be done to try to make this better?
I think from like Sigma implementation, gradual implementation, phased-in implementation is good. That gives folks time to adjust, right? And then thinking about plans, designs for the GSPs that are flexible, that allow for both flexibility in allocation and then flexibility in use, right? If a farm is able to, have a little bit more certainty on what things are going to look like in the future in terms of what they can withdraw, and then have flexible allocation maybe year to year, you can make things happen. You can adjust, right, a little bit more. And from that, I think on the other standpoint too, we need continued state support, right? We're going through this together as you know, as the state. Everyone's impacted one way or another. If it's not just the farm, but it's the local community, it's the broader, you know, it's all of the support industries that are going to be impacted as well. So we need state support. And I think there's some good stuff out there. The Strategic Growth Council, who funded that first study, is working with the Department of Conservation and doing, you know, the sustainable ag lands and some of these other programs that hopefully will help, you know, multi-benefit land repurposing and things. So when we have this idle land, it can be used in the best way possible. That's just lower water use, right? And so I think there's opportunity there, right? There's opportunity for non-traditional collaboration that I think moving forward we might see benefits on a lot of different ends. So how can we work together as a community to solve this problem? I think is something that's a good thing that we can look to and strive for.
Thanks, Dave. How about you? What things do you see out there that dairies can do to help make it better?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a tough opportunity, or tough issue that came up, and unfortunately, it came up right in the middle of a drought. I mean, it would have been a lot easier to start implementation of Sigma in a couple wet years, see what we could do. Last wet year we had was 2019. At least here in the South Valley, I've never seen more water move around, surface water move around, and people take advantage of it. And that was just, the tip of the iceberg. People were understanding, learning the new programs, what's available, what can we do, what options do we have. And so really, California, at least in the south part of the valley, is really, it's a feast or famine, and so for that, you have to be prepared when we do get these wet years, when we do have these opportunities for water. And if you have access to surface water supply, you got to be creative. You got to find ways to take it. You got to find ways to get that water, into your facility, into a storage, recharge, and it's right after we've had big rain events. We just had 3-4 inches of rain, everything's soaked and underwater, but those are the opportunities of when you need to be prepared to be able to take the water. Those of you that don't have access to surface water and those that do, these wet years, we really hopefully working with the GSAs and the GSPs, encouraging that during these wet years, we grow for healthy soils and for other reasons, the cover crops. We don't want to become a dust bowl. Allow, it might be less permanent crops in certain areas, but these areas will be set up and established, maybe short-term set-aside programs. But on wet years, you want to grow as much produce as you can out of there. And it'll be supply and demand. I mean, you'll be competing with the other annual crops, but grow wheat, grow corn. And during those opportunities, as a dairy farmer, that's your banking program. Take that water that it took to grow those crops and get it on your facility, store it, stack it. You need more than 6 months of storage. You need more than a year's worth of storage. Get 2-3 years worth of storage. Silage is fine. If you cover it right and manage it right, it can be okay. Take advantage of those wet years to build up for the dry years. The other thing as a dairy farmer, is we're in implementation today, when we, everybody, doesn't know how to react. A dairy farmer calls our office. What do we do? Every dairy is unique. Every dairy farmer is unique. Start understanding your day-to-day operation. How much water are you actually using? If you don't have meters, get meters installed. If you're not looking at your evapotranspiration, there's a website, OpenET, that's the freeware. May not be as accurate as some of the private guys out there. Go start looking at how much water is being consumed on your facility. Start putting together a water budget. Start understanding exactly how much water your dairy facility needs, to be able to feed the animals that you have on your facility. Get the data and the information so you can react when they come in and say, the GSA comes in and says, we're going to reduce you to 20 inches of water. Well, what does that do? That's going to, you need to numerically and quantifiably understand that. And it's very easy to do right now on a dairy facility. You can go, and yeah, you may be using 40 inches and they're telling you can only have 20 inches, but it's good to know where you're at, know what opportunities are available out there. And then, really, just, yeah. Okay. And then really, as what was discussed earlier is get involved. That there's a lot of meetings right now, and the farmers need to be at those meetings. The dairy farmers need to be at those meetings because those are where the policies, the rules, and the regulations are being set. And if they're being set, I'm an engineer, by a bunch of engineers and a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of consultants, it's not going to work out near as well as if the farmers are in the room leading the process and moving this thing forward. There's plenty of meetings, trust me, that you can get involved with. It takes time, it takes effort, but that feedback loop to the consultants and to the managers of these GSAs that can ultimately provide the feedback loop to the state of California that are implementing these is really what's going to allow this to move forward as effectively as possible. And we've seen great success with people getting involved, being innovative, finding ways to move things forward. And, in other areas that maybe aren't doing as much as other areas and falling behind, the uncertainty, the volatility, all of that, the quicker you can come to a solution, that and build yourself some time and some efforts to make that work, and understanding quantifiably what you've got going on. I mean, these are the things you can start doing tomorrow if you're not already doing them. And then you can react a lot better when these rules and policies come into play.
Well, that is just terrific advice. If there are any questions out in the audience, we got a couple of minutes here. I'd encourage you to get any questions in quickly. There's some feature there. This technology is a little beyond my comprehension, but there's got to be some way for you to put a question in the chat and relay it to us, and we'll get these guys to weigh in. But Dave, those are really important comments that you made, and Michael, on the state involvement, that I don't think we can emphasize that enough. We had one of the members of the state assembly that came in yesterday to a local water district meeting we were having down in Tipton, and room full of water folks and farmers, and what do you need? Well, hey, we've basically changed the entire paradigm, right, of the Central Valley. We should have probably regulated groundwater extraction decades ago, but we didn't. And so we built an agriculture, powerhouse in the Central Valley, based on the fact that groundwater could be extracted, without regulation. And now we're coming in after the fact and we're regulating it. And that's good, but it has implications, and the state, has provided some resources, but there's a lot more that is going to need to be done, particularly in terms of conveyance, to get these waters to the places where they need to be in the short windows when they become available. And getting the state to take a little bit bigger role in providing funding for the projects is an important thing. We do have a question for Dave in particular. Can you explain how to have access to the OpenET website?
Yeah, if you just go to Google and Google OpenET, and maybe put in a keyword evapotranspiration or something along those lines, it should pop up. Once you get to the website, the OpenET website, you'll have to create a username and a login. It's all free. You have to create that login and user. Then as soon as you get in, it's a map-based software, so you can just type in your address and it'll zoom right down to where you want to go, or you could just scroll around. Just for those of you familiar with Google Earth, it operates very similar. So just go to Google, look for OpenET, and take you to that website, sign up, and you'll have access.
Okay. Another question. Are there crops that have lower evaporative qualities? I guess, crops that would be of use to the dairy industry. Dave or Michael, you got one
There
that you
are,
know about?
yeah, yeah, I would say, Dr. Michael might know better, but, talk to your agronomist. The concern is if you talk to your agronomist and talk to your nutritionist, right? To make sure that what you're doing is gonna still achieve the high milk production and the efficiencies you need on your dairy to operate. What we've encouraged people to do is to grow, the most efficient amount of forages that they can, highest yield that they possibly can, shoot for that 40 ton per acre corn, and just, yeah, use the least amount of water you need to get that, or whatever the evapotranspiration is, that, but get the best yield you can on the highest quality feed, rather than growing a lot less feed for, a lot less water. There's other overhead costs associated with it, but it's really a discussion you really need to have with your agronomist and your nutritionist to make sure it makes sense. But yeah, go ahead. If you know of any, I don't know anything off the top of my head.
No magic bullets, no magic beans out there. There is another question, and maybe Michael, you want to tackle this one. Question is, any ideas for how processors can work with producers on water? You anticipate talking to processors in your study here? Maybe
yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. I think seeing how everything's going to flow through and really putting a better economic model to how everything flows through is going to be really important. That's going to be a linchpin for this coming study, right? It's not something that has been done. If it has, it hasn't been done a lot, and I don't know that we have any recent real research on what the economic flow is through, right, from production all the way out, for the dairy industry, and so that's going to be a really important thing. Definitely working together and understanding these relationships is going to be important. Do I have suggestions for how to work together? I think that's something that we're going to work on, and hopefully we'll be able to say more in what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's an important, yet unexplored area. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no. Again, for on the ET side of things, at Cal Poly's Irrigation Training and Research Center, ITRC, also tracks ET data, and that's all open, and they're always, it's a good group of folks over there, and always welcome to work with anyone who's interested. So Cal Poly ITRC, yeah.
The advantage.
Very good.
Yeah, the advantage of OpenET is that easy to access. The disadvantage of it is that it's not particularly, it's not tracking with as well with Land IQ, which is the service provider of the ET data that most of the GSAs are actually using for their budgeting purposes. It tends to run, what do you think, 10 to 15% higher, Dave? And when you've looked at that, that's been kind of the observation that I've had.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I would agree.
Another question that came in was, attending GSA meetings is important. Are there other meetings that should also be attended? We're probably running a little bit low on time. I attend a lot of meetings. I mean, hundreds of them. And I can tell you that there are some other meetings that are pretty interesting. I tend to follow the Friant Water Authority because the Friant system supplies a lot of the water that serves the areas that support the dairy industry. So knowing what's going on there, they're very accessible. And if you go in person, sometimes you can even get lunch out of it. But there are other water entities that are very important. The San Joaquin Valley Blueprint is a new initiative, been going a couple of years. That's attempting to really pull together the whole San Joaquin Valley, north, south, east, west, in a common effort to really map the kind of things that will need to be done if we're to preserve and enhance the agriculture in our communities, which are all tied together in the San Joaquin Valley. So there are broader initiatives and efforts to be involved in. But I think we're about out of time. Michael and David, thank you so much. Just great insights. Water scarcity, unfortunately, I don't think is going to be a one-off. I think we're going to be dealing with this for a long time, and we got to just continue to get smarter and more innovative, and we can't control the precipitation, but praying for rain is not a bad idea either. We ultimately depend on nature to give us these resources, and so we're doing the best we can. Anyway, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks much, and thanks for a good panel.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Talk to you later.